welcome back to another episode of Sit Down with Dale. This month we're going to be talking about data protection in terms of business continuity and disaster recovery. So to kick us off with, what does data protection actually mean in practice?
All of the activities that come under business continuity and data protection really fit under a single category of risk management. And it's how a business looks at what are the activities that are critical to its success and how it ensures that they continue almost irrespective of what's happening in the world around that business. So, for us sitting out here today, how are we protecting ourselves from rain if it starts to rain? Well, we've got a roof over our heads, so that's risk mitigation. It's windy, so we've got extra clothes on. That's the sort of thing that you're really looking at with business continuity. How do we put a roof over our data? How do we make sure that it's kept nice and warm and safe? How do we do that effectively, and how do we understand that? So that's really what business continuity planning is in a business sense.
And so where are sort of the most common weak spots that you guys find in particular IT environments?
Look, it probably comes down to what I'd categorise as a lack of formal understanding of what's included in lots of applications and systems. So one area we see a lot of assumptions around is, say, Microsoft 365. People assume that because it's cloud hosted that it's automatically backed up and protected. And the reality is not quite as simple as that. Microsoft or even Amazon or Google in their cloud environments, they will protect the cloud as in their environment, and they will protect the data that actually runs their systems, but they don't actually protect the data that's contained within their systems. They look at that under what they call their shared responsibility model, and they say that the protection of the data that you've uploaded is actually your responsibility. So, if they lost a complete server, they would be able to restore it to a point in time. But if you've deleted a file 3 weeks ago, you'd have very little chance of actually being able to recover that without actually having looked at your own business risk profile and having some level of data backup in place for that file.
And so, we talk a lot of different over the different months about what are the basics of each different thing. And so if we want to get the basics right for protecting our data, what sort of areas should we focus on locking in first?
Yeah, look, great question. It really comes down to, from a business perspective, understanding what is crucial to the operation of your business. And that's end to end. So if you're running a shop, for example, for you to be able to open up and serve clients, you need power. You need your point of sale system running. You need your cash register. You probably need some ability to actually know what stock you've got on the floor. These are your critical processes. So you look at each of those critical processes and you look at what's actually involved in having them operational. And then you make sure that you understand what are the risks around those processes. So for opening a shop, have you got power? If there's no power, or if you're in an area where power is known to go out, what are you actually doing to protect that? What are you doing to mitigate that risk? Have you looked at having your own generator? Have you looked at having some level of battery backup? Have you got a second shop where you can turn around and go, you know what, this one's out, we'll move to the second site? It's that level of planning in advance to understand the risk, understand the consequence of that risk, and understand how often it's likely to happen and whether you actually need to plan for that. So it's really about that planning in advance of an event and knowing what you'll do if that event does come to happen.
And so how do we connect, say, like Microsoft 365 security? How do we connect that to business continuity in a specific IT sense?
Yeah, look, great question. Having your data in the cloud is generally considered more secure than having it on a server in your premise. And that comes from, I guess, what you would call the risk of theft. So, if you've got all of your data sitting on a single server in a single site and somebody either burns that site down, or there's a flooding event, or somebody walks in and actually picks that device up and walks out with it, that data's gone. All right? Simple fact. Much harder for that to happen in a cloud environment like Microsoft 365, generally. Where that becomes a risk point is if you have not implemented the security protocols that are available to an appropriate level. And it's that we see as probably one of the most common risk points within, say, Microsoft 365, is that user accounts are not afforded the level of protection that they actually need. And in a lot of businesses, they haven't necessarily thought about what data each account should have access to. And an entry-level position account might actually have access to full payroll data, which is probably not appropriate. You've then got a risk point around what that account can actually do with that data. And it may well be that they can inadvertently delete all of that data. And that becomes a business risk that is difficult to mitigate.
And so what goes wrong, or I guess like how do we go about making sure that we or organizations not only have a recovery plan or should this happen, we'll just do this,
Yep.
But having it tested and actually like, if we do okay guys, we're gonna like just pretend the power's gone out and
Yep.
then what do we do to respond to this sort of thing? How do we make sure that we have a tested plan, and what happens when we don't test them?
How do I politely put this? This is the discipline of business. Being successful in business is not any one great big decision. It's lots of little decisions carried out with regularity and with a disciplined focus. And business continuity planning or risk mitigation is exactly that. It's fine to have a plan, but unless you're regularly testing that plan, you don't know what else has actually changed in your environment that in a stressful situation when you actually really need to call on that plan, you're not able to execute because something has changed, or somebody who was integral to that plan has moved on out of the organisation, or somebody has changed something outside of your control. Even to the point that it might be something like the building you're in has just had a change of building manager and they've changed the locks on a particular cupboard that holds something critical. If you don't know about that, that can add hours to your recovery time. So it becomes very much a point that in the testing of your recovery plan, you will identify things that have changed. You're able to then go through a mitigation exercise to fix that up before it becomes critical to the actual recovery process.
And what do you recommend would be an appropriate sort of time period to do these tested recoveries?
Look, for each organisation, it will be slightly different. For a small organisation, you might be doing an annual disaster recovery test or business continuity test or a scenario. For a mid-sized organisation, you'd be looking at doing it every 6 months. And for larger multi-site organisations, you're probably going to do a quarterly test. It's almost like, if you're in a multi-storey building, there's regular fire alarm testing and evacuation drill testing. This sort of stuff on the technology side of things should be viewed exactly the same. It's a critical part of business operations, so it should be afforded the same level of priority, focus and discipline.
And so if an organisation is like, okay, we haven't done one of these in quite a while,
Yep.
let's sort of plan to do it in the next couple of months, if it is a quarterly thing, for example, where would you recommend starting?
Start from the perspective that your test is going to fail, and that's okay. Look, the reality is you can't do a first up test and expect to have everything right. It has to be a safe space for people to go, you know what, this is what we expected to happen. What actually happened was something completely different, and we're okay with that. We learn from it, we adapt the plan, and next time around we actually get it right. I know internally we've run this for a number of organisations who had expectations that they'd be able to recover an entire cloud environment inside 4 or 5 hours. The reality was the first time this was actually executed, it took 4 days. And that was okay because the second time around it was actually done in 14 hours. The third time around it got down to 6 hours. And by the fourth iteration, they actually had it down within target time. And that came down to an iterative learning process on that, which is okay. You can't know everything when you start. So you have to start from the basis that it's actually okay to fail. You're in a safe space. You don't want your first time trying to do this is when muck's happened and it's an emergency that you need to fix.
And so if you have like one other sort of top tip, what's one thing that business leaders should keep in mind about data protection?
You're always going to overestimate how prepared you are. The reality is that most businesses will think that they've got 100% of their data protected 100% of the time. The reality is you've maybe got 50% of your data well protected and you've got the other 50% perhaps recoverable in some format sometime. So it's be prepared that you are not prepared.
And it's okay to not be prepared to a degree.
It's okay when you're testing. You want to make sure you find all that stuff out in your testing, not when muck's happened and you've got an hour to recover something.
Yeah. So if you haven't done a tested recovery in a while, or you think maybe it's time to give a little bit of an update and you're not 100% sure where to start, don't be afraid to reach out.
Reach out, absolutely. We've got plenty of stuff on this. We've got scenarios that we can run with your team. We've got scenarios that we can run with your executive team. We've got canned examples that we can actually work through to help you understand what the true risk is around the various aspects of your tech stack and your business operations.
And we've got more information linked down in the description below as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.